even though they're probably making the same arguments. Like two things can look the same, but only get scrutinized to hell. Even though they're probably making the same get scrutinized to hell. Even though they're probably making the same arguments. Like two things can look the same, but only one of them feels right. We spend a lot of time trying to define those differences. It is kind of our thing. We like systems that draw lines between categories. Fire beats grass, rock beats paper, gun beats sword. That sort of logic comforts us. It makes the world easier to digest. And in games, nothing embodies that impulse more than elemental systems. They're everywhere. They're easy to explain, easy to market, and when they are done well, they add depth, synergy, identity. But when they are done poorly, or worse, when they feel meaningless, it all starts to collapse. Suddenly, every character feels the same. Every fight starts to blend together, and the illusion of choice turns out to be just that, an illusion. That is actually where Wuthering Waves started. When it launched, one of the earliest criticisms was that the characters felt interchangeable, that there wasn't enough variety, that it didn't matter who you brought because the systems didn't reward difference. Elemental identity existed technically, but it wasn't doing anything meaningful.
Jin Shi and Chang-Li kind of play the same way. What the fuck?
Yeah, I still didn't get it, but hey, the devs listen now. Because over time, updates rolled out that tried to address that sameness, starting quietly and then more deliberately, with the introduction of elemental negative statuses. Frazzle, erosion, flare, subtle debuffs with names that sounded dramatic, but effects that didn't exactly blow anyone's socks off. And that led to a second wave of criticism. Now that variety does exist, it is apparently not good enough.
Access to these debuffs, which would be cool if majority of them hit suck. I think it's fair to say Spectral Frazzle doesn't do that much damage.
But here's where I think it gets interesting. Because what if it not being good is the point? Let's talk about that. And you can see it from the beginning. Players look at the elemental icons next to each character and went red equals fire, blue equals water, green set goes on the green guy. I'm a genius. I'm gonna be a gacha content creator. And honestly, I don't blame them. The game doesn't go out of its way to explain anything. Or maybe it did and we just didn't notice. So when the enemy started inflicting negative effects, like arrow erosion or spectral frazzle, and the health bars quietly melted away after the fight was over, people assumed that it was a bug. So for a lot of players, their first impression of the elemental system was confusion, followed by dismissal. The system felt mundane or shallow, or worse, broken. But it wasn't broken, it was just subtle. Subtle in a way that caught people off guard. And that is where the misunderstanding started. And once people did start to notice the elemental mechanics, the next reaction came almost instant. Oh, so it's just like Genshin. Which I mean, visually, I guess so. You've got color-coded elements. That is an aesthetic overlap, that is fair to say. But beyond that, the comparison falls apart pretty quickly. What is funny is that people seem to forget elemental systems are one of the oldest design staples in gaming. Pokemon had it since the 90s. Final Fantasy had it, or even in Gacha. Summoners War also had it. This isn't a new invention, and it definitely isn't owed by Genshin. What actually matters is how the system functions in the gameplay loop. And here is where Wuthering Waves quietly goes in a completely different direction. Genshin's system is built around elemental reactions. It is the centerpiece. The whole combat loop is optimized around triggering specific reactions, because some are clearly stronger than the others. If you are not running Vaporize, Melt, or Hyper Bloom, you are probably doing less damage than you could. It becomes a meta obligation. Wuthering Waves, though, it doesn't really care if you're triggering arrow erosion or not. These effects exist, but they are not the main axis of power. In fact, they are almost deliberately modest, and that restraint opens up a really different kind of flexibility. So yeah, the comparison to Genshin is common, but honestly, it is pretty surface level. It misses what makes Wuthering Waves' system feel unique, and to really see how the two differ, you have to look at how they influence team building, and that is where things get interesting. So let's talk about the Genshin system, because yes, it is powerful, and arguably it is polished, but there is a cost to how tightly everything is optimized. Take reactions like Vaporize or Hyper Bloom, these aren't just strong, they're mathematically overwhelming. Once you get into higher level content, it stops being a preference and becomes a requirement. If your team isn't built around one of these reactions, you are wasting your time. Meanwhile, teams built around things like Superconduct or physical damage in general quietly falls off the face of Tavai. And Mono Geo teams, let's just say Copium is a renewable source in that community. And then there is Elemental Resonance. On paper, it sounds cool. Bring 2 pyro characters and then get an attack buff. Okay, nice. But in practice, some of these resonances are so lopsided that it forces team building into this narrow, meta choke corner. You are not choosing characters because you like them. You are choosing them because not picking them is mathematically irresponsible. That's why Bennett gets dragged into nearly every team round, and it just quietly lets you deal less damage. Enemies have resistances, sure, but they are not immune. You can still break an arrow character into an arrow boss. The game won't stop you. It just won't reward you for it. And that sounds like a small difference, but it's not. It fundamentally shifts the tone of how you build teams. There are no Abyss Lecter style brick walls. The only real exceptions are the elemental prisms, but the rest of the game, it is freedom. You want to bring a full Spectral team into a Spectral resistant boss fight? You want to solo difficulty 6 hologram Hecate with a dungeon? Go for it.